Happy Life Month. It's Monday, June 2nd, 2025. Escalations in Ukraine as the newest frontier in warfare expands. Where's the inflation we were promised? One Treasury Secretary wants to know. And I have a few questions about Chinese real estate investments. Yes, really. Next on the AM Update.
Hospitals will close, nursing homes will shut down, and people will literally die.
Why don't we stop trying to say this could happen and wait and see what does happen?
We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America.
I thought he was a good president.
You should never have harmful migration, ever.
Just the dawn of the golden age, and that it will take years and decades to accomplish its objectives, that we're finally back on the right track.
Well, we can't do it when he's got Molotov cocktails on. If you are fighting, you have it. That's what he's got right here. Is Molotov.
That is the sound of the alleged suspect after the attack, where he threw Molotov cocktails at people while he said, "This will end when Palestine is free and for us." The FBI is investigating a targeted terror attack where multiple people were set on fire Sunday afternoon near Pearl Street Mall in Boulder, Colorado. At around 1:26 local time, officers with the Boulder Police Department were called to the county courthouse on Pearl Street for reports of a man who had a weapon setting people on fire. The man was arrested at the scene without an incident. The attack took place near an event put on by the Run for Their Lives, a grassroots organization that facilitates global run and walk events, calling for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. According to Bill Malugin at Fox News, citing Department of Homeland Security officials, the Boulder terror suspect is an Egyptian national in the U.S. illegally as a visa overstay who entered the United States during the Biden administration. Mohammed Sabri Solomon arrived at LAX airports on August 27th of 2022 on a B-1 non-immigrant visa with an authorized stay through the beginning of 2023, but he overstayed and never left. So, yet another remnant of the Biden administration's disastrous border and immigration policy. This is going to be either something that drives news coverage early in the week or something swept under the rug altogether. Ukraine launched unprecedented drone strikes deep inside Russia, targeting dozens of strategic bombers at several bases, according to Ukrainian officials and videos published on social media. The wide-ranging attack took place shortly before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced he's sending a delegation headed by Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov in ceasefire talks with Russia in Istanbul later today. Ukraine did not notify the Trump administration of the attack in advance, according to Ukrainian officials. A Ukrainian official told Axios the operation was conducted by the country's security service and was planned for more than a year. Those officials said the intelligence officers launched attack drones from trucks that have been covertly placed near Russian air bases, some of them as far away as Siberia, thousands of miles from the warfront. Around 40 Russian military planes, among them strategic bombers, were reportedly hit in the attack. A Ukrainian official says the planes that were attacked were used by the Russian military for airstrikes on Ukrainian cities. Now, typically, I'm very mum about any details about back and forth attacks in this Ukraine-Russia conflict. But this one seems to have more veracity because it seems like the Russians are extremely pissed off at the moment. The Russian Defense Ministry accused Ukraine of terror attacks. The Russian Defense Minister says Ukraine used drones against airfields. Some of their planes, quote unquote, caught on fire. So they're trying to mitigate what was actually done. So it seems like whatever happened with this story had some wheels. Now, there was some misreporting or maybe some getting our signals crossed yesterday in terms of actually whether or not the Trump administration was notified about Ukraine's long attacks deep inside Russia. It was reported earlier that they notified the Trump administration in advance of those Russian attacks, which would be kind of a surprise. Later, it was clarified, or later sources within the White House said, we were not notified about these attacks. Somebody's lying or something got misreported. In other news, since we last spoke, the Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration can revoke legal status to nearly 500,000 immigrants who were here legally, dubiously legally. The majority allowed Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem to end a Biden-era program that gave temporary legal status to 532,000 U.S. non-citizens, primarily from Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Haiti. Noem initially terminated the Biden administration's CHNV parole programs in March. U.S. District Judge Indira Talwani, an Obama appointee, blocked the administration from ending the program in April. Talwani wrote in that order, quote, "If their parole status is allowed to lapse, plaintiffs will be faced with two unfavorable options: continue following the law and leave the country on their own, or await removal proceedings. If plaintiffs were to leave the country on their own, they will face dangers in their native countries as set forth in their affidavits." The Trump administration argued that the lower court's order, quote, "stymies the government's ability to terminate parole grants that the secretary has determined undermines U.S. interests, and thus it inhibits the government's pursuit of its foreign policy goals." Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor dissented in the 7-2 order, meaning that the Trump administration can go ahead and end that Obama, Freudian slip, that Biden-era parole program. What this essentially was just the Biden administration's attempt to actually make another one of their attempts, one of their numerous attempts to make illegal immigration, wink, wink, nod, nod, legal. And you'll notice back then, it didn't seem like there were any courts who were just stepping up to the plate saying, "Oh no, you can't have 500,000 people just here legally, wink, wink, nod, nod." There were no courts that were stepping up to say, "No, let's get in the way of here. Universal injunction, you can't bring 500,000 people into this country." Or the people who are here illegally, you can't just automatically give them legal status. And that's what the Trump administration reversed just a couple of months ago. But then there were judges lined up all over the case, including this Obama-appointed judge, saying, no, you can't make these legal status people illegal again. Again, the latest example, this time the Supreme Court got it right, but the latest example of just this judicial tyranny run amok, just grinding the gears of the Trump administration, the power that they were duly given by the American people. On the topic of the economy, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went at Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation, saying when he was there in March talking to this same anchor, she was saying something different than she is now.
The reality is there will either be less inventory or things at higher prices or both.
Margaret, when we were here in March, you said there was going to be big inflation. There hasn't been any inflation. Actually, the inflation numbers are the best in 4 years. So why don't we stop trying to say this could happen and wait and see what does happen?
So that is at least the second example of people within the Trump administration absolutely nuking Margaret Brennan's credibility. Of course, the most famous one was when J.D. Vance, vice president, said, "I don't really care, Margaret," on the issue of getting rid of some of the violent, non-culturally conforming people who are here illegally, getting them out of your neighborhoods. This was the second mic drop, when Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent just says, "Margaret, the last time we spoke, you were warning about this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. None of those things happened, and now you're trying to play the same game. Let's just see what actually happens and react to that." Well done, Treasury Secretary Bessent. He also said over the weekend he wants America to be less like New York and more like Florida.
On the other side, we're going to deliver a better product to the American people. Because Brett, I lived in New York, I lived in Florida, and state of New York spends about $235 billion a year. State of New York spends about $235 billion a year. State of Florida spends about $125 billion. Both states have approximately the same number of people, but Florida doesn't have an income tax. And I can tell you, having lived in both, it's better not to have an income tax, and Florida gives better services. So we want the U.S. to be more like Florida, less like New York.
At a rally in Pittsburgh on Friday, President Trump celebrating the U.S. Steel-Nippon merger or coexistence deal, whatever you want to call it. He says he's promising an even higher tariff on steel imports into the United States.
We are going to be imposing a 25% increase. We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America, which will even further secure the steel industry.
On the topic of the big, beautiful bill, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffrey says people are going to die if it's passed.
This bill actually hurts everyday Americans in order to reward billionaires. It would strip away health care from approximately 14 million Americans. Premiums, co-pays, and deductibles for tens of millions more will go up. Actually, if it ever were to be implemented into law, hospitals will close, nursing homes will shut down, and people will literally die.
I'm so sick of this emotional blackmail, this emotional manipulation. If you do this, people are going to die. It's a frickin' bill. It's a frickin' bill. You know what? Late last week, Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, of whom I am not a huge fan, because she came to fame on that famous ad where she said, "Send me to Washington, D.C. I'm going to make all the swampsters squeal." Now, coming from Iowa, we know a thing or two about hogs. She's been anything but that. She's a total swamp creature herself. Well, she was at a town hall in Iowa late last week where she was talking about the big, beautiful bill, and some heckler said, "People will die." And she retorted and said, "Well, we're all going to die." Now, is that great politics? Could you message that maybe a little deftly or better? Maybe. I'm not going to squabble with that, I should say. Because what she did there is just say, no, I'm not playing this emotional manipulation game, this emotional blackmail game. I'm so sick of that. Democrats have done that my entire life, and I'm ready for it to be over. Quickly, a couple of items before we get to the break. The Biden administration admitted possible cancer-causing toxins were spread in East Palestine, Ohio, following the Norfolk Southern train derailment in 2023. That's according to explosive new emails, despite the White House insisting residents were safe. The emails show that FEMA recovery leader James McPherson wrote in a March 29, 2024 email to other public health officials, quote, "The occurrence of cancer cluster in EP or East Palestine is not zero. Is not zero." That was a year after the crash. McPherson went on to say, quote, "As you are all aware, the first 48 hours of the fire created a really toxic plume. However, just 2 months earlier, President Biden had excoriated, quote, multi-million-dollar railroad companies transporting toxic chemicals for the fiasco, but praised his administration's, quote, Herculean efforts to resolve the, quote-unquote, vast majority of East Palestine's problems. Of course, this is while his own administration was attempting to cover up facts and material evidence that showed that there was a real cancer risk from that train derailment. Just absolutely wicked stuff. Old Bubba was interviewed by CBS over the weekend, and he said he had no idea there was any sort of decline when it came to Joe Biden's mental acuity.
Did you ever have a moment with him where you thought maybe he was unfit to run for president? No.
I thought he was a good president. The only concern I thought he had to deal with was, could anybody do that job until they were 86? And we'd had several long talks. I had never seen him and walked away thinking he can't do this anymore. He was always on top of his brief.
Yeah. Just the few times that I've heard former President Bill Clinton speak over the past year and a half or so when he was on the campaign trail for Joe Biden, it seemed pretty apparent that Bubba probably would have made at least a more competent or with-it president than Joe Biden was. When we come back, it's not the end for Doge, according to its Doge father, Elon Musk. A new poll from one of the most accurate pollsters and prognosticators over the past few cycles shows a curious figure heading the 2028 Democrat primary field, and I have a few questions about Chinese real estate. That's coming up next.
This is not the end of Doge, but really the beginning. My time as a special government employee necessarily had to end. It was a limited time thing. It's 134 days, I believe, which ends in a few days. So that it comes with a time limit. But the Doge team will only grow stronger over time. The Doge influence will only grow stronger. I'd liken it to sort of Buddhism. It's like a way of life. So it is permeating throughout the government. And I'm confident that over time we will see $1 trillion of savings and a reduction in $1 trillion of waste and fraud reduction.
That is Elon Musk speaking at the Oval Office since we last spoke on Friday, discussing how the efforts of Doge are not ending with his temporary government or special government employee status ending, but will continue on. So maybe not the rift that we thought it could have been. Of course, these are grown men. They're going to have disagreements. They're going to have disappointments, and they might air those in public, but maybe not quite the rift that we thought was developing, at least between the White House and Elon Musk, as it pertains to his time with Doge and his disappointment with the big, beautiful bill. He also confirmed, along with President Trump on Friday, he will continue on and make some trips to the White House in an advisor capacity. Let's go to this. Atlas Intel has been one of the best and most accurate pollsters over the last couple of cycles, at least when it comes to national politics. They have a new Democrat 2028 primary poll. And who is at the top? I'm not sure if he's... you know what? That could have been a really... especially given that this is the beginning of the artist formerly known as Pride Month. It's now Life Month. That could have been a really bad double entendre. So we're not even going to think about that. But who is on top? Oh my gosh. Did it again. Pete Buttigieg leads the field. 32%. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 19%. And then we've got Kamala Harris at 17%, Booker and Newsom, Shapiro, Whitmer, Warnock, all at 10% or below. Can't say that I'm super surprised by this. I will tell you, though, if Pete Buttigieg is the nominee, there is a real chance, no matter how bad the economy is, if it is bad at all, and I don't think it will be, there's a real chance in 2028 that if Pete Buttigieg is the Democrat nominee, that Republicans, no matter who they throw up there, will probably win. Now, I don't say that to be complacent, but given Pete Buttigieg's lifestyle, there's no way he's going to be the Democrat nominee. Going to hear from this guy twice today. Here is White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller on immigration and just how messed up our system has been.
You should never have harmful migration, ever. There should never be a case where somebody's coming into this country who has a negative view about America, about the West, about our civilization, isn't going to be able to pay their own way, is going to have a hostile attitude about the way we live in this country. Like, why would any society, why would any civilization that actually wants to preserve itself allow for any migration that is negative to the country as a whole?
Well, that type of country might be run by people in some areas who have a hostile attitude about the way we live and a negative view of America. Maybe places like Nashville, Tennessee, where two powerful committees in the House of Representatives are opening an investigation into another Democratic official accused of blocking federal immigration authorities. House Homeland Security Committee Chair Mark Green of Tennessee is leading a probe into Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell alongside Nashville area Representative Andy Ogles. Ogles had been petitioning leaders for weeks to look into O'Connell after the Democratic leader publicly denounced immigration and customs enforcement operations in his city and signed an executive order aimed at tracking ICE movements in the area. He sent a letter earlier this month accusing O'Connell of, quote, obstructing federal law enforcement. The probe is being supported by the House Judiciary Committee, which is led by Chair Jim Jordan of Ohio and Representative Tom McClintock of California, chair of the Subcommittee for Immigration Enforcement. Nashville, isn't that like right-wing America? Conservative Mecca? Is it not? You get immigration, illegal immigration into this country, where by and large, the vast majority are either here on the take or are hostile to this country, because by and large, this country has been run by people who are hostile to the ideals of America and the way that we live. That's why. And that's how you get it. Let's go out to the Pacific Northwest. A couple of examples over the weekend of girls who should not be put in the positions they've been put in, but are standing strong nonetheless. This is in Oregon, where two females refused to stand on the podium at the state high school track and field championships as a boy was awarded first place. Those girls, obviously, having none of that charade. Good for them. That's in Oregon. In Washington, listen to this. This is the 400 meter championship. And listen to this when the actual winner was announced. She got second place officially, but everyone knows she's the actual winner.
Second place, Lauren Matthews. And first place, your 2025 winner, in a time of 55.70 from East Valley of Spokane, Veronica Garcia.
That's a dude who was awarded first place at that track and field championship. I believe it was the girls 400. And you could hear the runner-up officially, who should be the actual winner. She was cheered, applauded in no uncertain terms, while the official winner, who is really the biggest loser, was booed because it's a dude competing against women. There's still life in pockets of states like Oregon and Washington. Good for them for standing up for the truth. And now here's this. Going back to White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. He was interviewed by Fox News to discuss what exactly is going wrong with the Democrat Party.
Where do you think their party goes from here?
Part of the reason why they have resorted to lawfare as effectively their entire political strategy is because they have an unsellable ideology. In other words, they're committed in a popular democracy. They're committed to a series of beliefs that are like 10, 20% in support. So they have to be corrupt to get anything done. Men and women's sports, as President says, completely open borders to the worst criminals on the face of the earth. People guilty of child predation, murder, even people who are guilty of violent torture and beating and killing and just senseless slaughtering. And they're let in without limitation for 4 years, right? A political party that's committed to raising taxes on everybody, right? A political party that is against the police, that wants to defund the police in your community, that wants to let rioters run free. And the punching bag for all of this are the hardworking American citizens. The people who do it right, they're the ones who are getting the brunt of it every day, economically, socially, culturally. So it's an unwinnable political message. If we can accomplish these reforms to just have a free and fair society, the Democrats are doomed. They cannot compete or operate in a fair system, which is why they have to rig it.
There's White House Deputy Chief of Staff putting more meat on the bones of my commentary last week, talking about the Democrats not having a messaging or authenticity problem, but a matrix problem. They have set up the system that all that they have is an unsellable, as Stephen Miller said, an unsellable political ideology. That's where they went wrong. That's why they resort to lawfare. In tandem with this, I saw this clip over the weekend as well. What do you make of the fact that we see polls, which are frequently used as propaganda? The only reason I cited Atlas Intel earlier is because they have a pretty good track record, at least the last couple of cycles, but frequently used as propaganda or just inaccurate, wholly inaccurate. But what do you make of polls, however, saying that still the majority of people in this country think that we're on the right track, while President Trump, who is the leader of this country, has, we're being told, an underwater favorability? Well, here's the Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, during a debate up in Canada featuring himself and Kellyanne Conway versus a couple of libs named Ezra Klein and Ben Rhodes, discussing this very phenomenon. Here's Kevin Roberts.
And one real important thing to keep in mind, also keeping in mind that your Canadian media try to vaccinate you from the truth, is that Donald Trump remains very popular. Over half of Americans, as we sit here tonight, say that the country is on the right track. A marked change, as you know, from the previous 4 years. Why do they say that? Because regardless of what they think about Donald Trump as a person, regardless of what they think about specific policies, regardless of their recognition that this is just the dawn of the golden age and that it will take years and decades to accomplish its objectives, that we're finally back on the right track. And the advent of a Trump-Vance political coalition, which is more working class, more multi-ethnic, means that Americans of all backgrounds, as it should be, support this agenda. And of course, in order for that agenda to realize the American dream, something that too few Americans believe in anymore, there will have to be success. And we've already seen success in beginning to end the regulatory environment that stifles not the business of the Fortune 50 companies that collude with big government, but that stifle the American dream for small and middle class, small business owners and middle class Americans.
So there is Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts pointing out during a debate in Canada that regardless of what people think personally of President Trump, the right track, wrong track continues to outperform Trump himself. It's not so much of, I think it's a mixture. I don't know what the ratio is, But it's definitely a mixture of what you heard from Stephen Miller there, saying that the Democrats have an unsellable ideology. It's a mixture of a reaction to that and a belief in what President Trump is doing. And I pray for his administration that they are able to follow through with their America First vision and what they're selling for this country to the utmost. When we come back for one final segment, air analysis, I have some questions. Based on what we saw in the Ukraine-Russian conflict over the weekend, I have some questions about Chinese real estate investments. That's coming up next. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. It was always a terrible idea. Ever. It was always a terrible idea to allow any foe on the geopolitical stage, any rival on the geopolitical stage, any country, any force that you have any doubt about. It was always a bad idea to allow them to purchase any investment properties or any investment real estate, anywhere near our military installations, especially on the mainland. But whether it's in Grand Forks, North Dakota, at the Grand Forks Air Force Base, or in Texas near Laughlin Air Force Base, or Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, Camp Grayling in Michigan, all examples in recent years of either successful or close to successful operations by Chinese Communist Party aligned businesses and businessmen from buying investment properties and real estate. Now, I want to clear up a misconception that I intentionally threw out there. You'll hear this term when it comes to Chinese business, Chinese individuals, what have you. You even heard this from Secretary of State Marco Rubio last week. Chinese-aligned, CCP-aligned students. And I totally support what he's doing, trying to draw down some of these student visas. A long time coming. But it's a misnomer to say that any of these entities are CCP-aligned, as if there are businesses in China that are not CCP-aligned. They're all CCP. It's a command economy. Especially given some of their overt intentions with what they want to do geopolitically, you should always just assume as the baseline that anybody in this country trying to do business in this country, physically in this country, from China, is a threat. Now, why do I bring all of this up? It was always a bad idea to even let the Chinese businesses acquire property near military installations. That was just always a bad idea. That's just common sense. You don't allow your enemies to potentially set up surveillance operations anywhere near your military bases. But in light of what we think happened in Ukraine, or with Ukraine, deep inside Russia, now you understand even more what the threat this is and what it poses. We're talking about little old Ukraine. Little old Ukraine. Using what we're told are civilian-marked semi-tractor trailers. Deep inside Russia, all the way inside Siberia, thousands of miles away. And they were able to carry out one of the most sophisticated asymmetrical attacks, maybe in the history of warfare, using drones against military installations inside Russia. So it was always a bad idea to allow foreign nationals, foreign companies to purchase, especially ones aligned with China, to purchase any form of real estate, any form of property, anywhere within spitting distance of U.S. military installations. That's just common sense. But in the year 2025, allowing them to even have this property, if it exists now, that's just straight up retarded, especially in light of where modern warfare is headed. The illustration that we just saw over the weekend, it's headed in a very sophisticated and hard to stop place. And I wonder how many Chinese-aligned, Chinese-owned warehouses, either here or in Canada, because they have even closer ties, the Chinese Communist Party, they have even closer ties to Canada than they do to the United States. I wonder how many warehouses in Canada are filled with drones similar to what we saw Ukraine use, just waiting to deploy to some of these properties that they've tried to purchase and sometimes successfully purchased near U.S. military bases. What we saw over the weekend is a new, let's just call it a new front line in modern warfare. Little old Ukraine able to strike deep and make a cut deep inside the heart of Russia. Now you know why it was always a terrible idea to allow foreign powers like China to try to purchase real estate close to military bases. And these days, it's just straight up retarded, especially in light of what we saw over the weekend. That's going to do it for a Monday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntire, and this is the AM Update.